Okay, so now that I've calmed down from my initial excitement about the show Willow coming out, I'm finally get to talk about it. So for those of us who haven't known, this right here, Willow, is probably one of the best fantasy movies to be made in the 80s and 90s. That's just my opinion, and it's really hard to debate that, mainly because there are a lot of movies that came out in the 80s that were fantasy based. Movies like Red Sonja, Conan the Barbarian and Conan the Destroyer, Neverending Story, Neverending Story 2, and even The Dark Crystal. All of these movies came out in the same decade. Not to even mention the newly growing sci-fi stories that were coming out, like Aliens and fucking Terminator and shit, right? But for many of us, Willow was the top peak. For me, Willow just barely outbeat the Neverending Story, only because as a kid, Neverending Story was kind of fucking terrifying. But the thing that set Willow apart from all the rest of the movies is that it was a fantasy movie just like the rest of them, but it had that George Lucas flair to it. There was love, there was fighting, there was action, there was drama, there was comedy in this fucking movie. But all in all, the storyline just was there. It was so much story to it, and it was enthralling. Now, what many of us don't actually know is that George Lucas actually teamed up with Chris Claremont, who's an avid author in the X-Men series and shit, to write a sequel, a continuation of the story of Willow called Shadow Moon. Now, as far as the TV series that's coming out in November, I have no clue if this series is actually going to be like a direct line of the book Shadow Moon. Hopefully it's not. And that's because Shadow Moon takes place 13 years after the events of the movie Willow. Which, based on how everybody looks, seeing how they casted everybody who was in Willow, except for Val Kilmer, because currently he's battling throat cancer, everybody aged. And they looked like they aged longer than 13 years. And to be honest, I honestly think this is George Lucas's way of bringing back Willow the exact same way he tried to bring Luke Skywalker back into the fold. Because that's pretty much the first impression that I got. I was like, this kind of feels like The Last Jedi or whatever. But because it's Willow, I am praying that is nowhere near as bad as those Star Wars movies. I don't know. Tell me what you think in the comments.